Hello everyone. Today we're going to be discussing the author Katherine Paterson. Katherine is the author of the book Jacob Have I Loved that we are going to be reading together as a novel unit in our class. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about her, and I'm going to talk to you about her background before I talk to you about some of the books that she has written. Katherine was born in China to two missionary parents who were American, and they spent the majority of their time moving around while she was young. The first 5 years of her life she did stay in China, but due to world events such as the Great Depression, which we will look at later, and World War II, the family had to move around, and they moved 18 times before she was 18 years old. So they moved quite a bit before the family finally settled in the United States in Virginia. Katherine loved reading. She thinks that as soon as she started to read, she started to write, although she's not quite sure when she actually did begin her earliest writings. She is thankful, she says in an interview, that most of her early writings were destroyed during all of their moves because she says that they were not very good. She does say that one letter that she wrote to her father when she was 7 years old was a very good piece of writing that she is still proud of to this day. She initially did not want to be a writer for her profession or for her career. She wanted to be a missionary or a movie star, two very vastly different professions. She did not become a movie star, but she did spend a lot of her time writing and acting in her own plays throughout her school career. Her secondary education, she went to King's College in Bristol, Tennessee. Following that, she spent 2 years in Richmond, Virginia in graduate school. She did want to go back into the mission field and do some work. She desperately wanted to go to China. She could not go to China, however, at the time the political climate did not allow that. So she did have a Japanese friend who convinced her to go to Japan. She was very reluctant to go to Japan at first because, as you know, she grew up during the World War II era when Japan was the enemy, and so she had to overcome some prejudices that she had from growing up to go to Japan, but she fell in love with it, and she spent 4 years in Japan as a missionary. She did come back to the United States to study, and when she came back to the United States, she met and fell in love with a young Presbyterian minister, and they were married in 1962. Her first professional writings were not the novels that we will talk about today. They were curriculum materials for 5th and 6th graders for her church school. While she was writing that, she discovered that she did not want to write nonfiction materials for a living or for her profession. She knew she wanted to write what she loved to read, and that was fiction. At this time, she had 4 young children. 2 were biological children, and 2 were adopted children, but they were all very young, and she, as you can imagine, she had a hard time fitting writing into her daily schedule. So she had some neighbors who volunteered to keep her children so that Katherine could take an adult education class in creative writing. This was pretty much the turnaround point for Katherine as far as her writing career. The book that she wrote while attending the creative writing class at night was eventually published. It's The Sign of the Chrysanthemum, and it is a children's book that is a Japanese fairy tale. And so she became a writer with the help of her husband and her neighbors. She says that her husband is still one of her biggest supporters, and even he encouraged her to put writer on their income tax returns as her career instead of homemaker. So he has been behind her 100% of the way. Katherine Paterson has written numerous novels, retellings, Christmas short stories, picture books, I can read books, chapter books, as well as she has written nonfiction and essays. Today, though, I'm going to talk with you about 4 of the novels that she has written. The Bridge to Terabithia is the first novel that we're going to discuss. It is a Newbery Medal award-winning book, and it was written by Katherine in 1977. And she wrote this novel as the result of a couple of tragedies that she and her family were experiencing. The previous year, Katherine had been diagnosed with cancer, and her family was very distraught about this diagnosis. Later in the year, her son David, who was 8 years old, his best friend Lisa, who was also 8, was struck and killed by lightning. David was very, very upset, as was the rest of the family, and Katherine desperately wanted to help and do something, but there was nothing that she could do to help. So she did what she could do, and that was to write. And so she wrote The Bridge to Terabithia about Jesse Aarons, a 10-year-old boy, and his best friend Leslie, who's also 10, and their adventures in their secluded kingdom that they developed together that was called Terabithia. The second book that I'm going to discuss is The Great Jilly Hopkins. And as you can see, Jilly looks to be a very stubborn child, and she is, but for good reason. This is also a Newbery Honor book that Katherine wrote. And The Great Jilly Hopkins, Jilly is a foster child who bounces around to different places in foster care, and it is again about another hero or heroine who is a young child and the obstacles that they have to overcome, which it seems to be the overlying theme through many of Katherine's works. This particular novel came about because at one point in Katherine's life she was a foster mother, and she did not feel that she was a very good foster mother. So because of that, she decided that she needed to write a book that would place emphasis on what it is actually like to be a foster child. And so she tried to look at the situation from that perspective. Then we have The Great Jilly Hopkins. The third book is Come Sing Jimmy Joe, and it was written by Katherine in 1985. And again, this book stems from personal experiences that she had. If you will think back to Maybelle Carter and the Carter family that sang, one of the children, Anita Carter, was in Katherine's grade or in school, and she was thrust into the spotlight and didn't necessarily want to be there when her mother Maybelle became famous and the family became famous singers. So this particular novel, Come Sing Jimmy Joe, which is not his name, he has to change his name because he's now famous. He is also thrust into the spotlight when his family becomes famous singers. Another experience from Katherine. The final book that I'm going to discuss with you today is Jacob Have I Loved. It is a Newbery award-winning book, and it is the book that we are going to focus on in class, and we're going to read together as a novel unit. The title comes from the Bible story about Jacob and Esau, the two brothers. Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated. If you think of that, you can see the correlation between the two sisters in the book, Louise and her sister Caroline. Louise has to overcome many problems during the novel, including her own insecurities, and we will discover what those are as we read the novel together. Currently, Katherine Paterson is on the board of the National Children's Book and Literacy Alliance, and she writes daily. She is also very active in her church. She is on the board of the United States Board of Books for Young People, the USBBY, and that's the U.S. section of the International Board of Books for Young People, and she enjoys that immensely, as it says, it keeps her in touch with people all over the world who are trying to make sure children everywhere experience the joy of reading. Following this author's study, we will be looking at images of the Great Depression and of the Chesapeake Bay and the crabbing industry. And then we will discuss those and then see how you react to those in your reflective journals. Thank you.